Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to today's Valorization talks that are being a part of the EU Knowledge Valorization Week. Today, we are going to talk about the knowledge valorization on the international level and how innovation that are being created in a big international organization can impact our society. My name is Tadas Tumenas, and I'm working for Lithuanian R&DI Liaison Office here in Brussels, and I will be serving as your moderator for today. Together with me, we have Mr. Anelli Giovanni, who is the Knowledge Transfer Group Leader at Cern. Good morning, Mr. Anelli.
Good morning.
So, before we're going to jump into our serious part and the conversation, I would like to give a short introduction about Cern. What Cern is doing and why Cern is here with us. So, as perhaps you are all aware that Cern is the European organization for the research, for the nuclear research, is one of the world's largest and most respected centers for scientific research. It's an international intergovernmental organization which also cooperates with the EU and also makes an impact on the European innovation and research agenda. So, Mr. Anelli, are you ready to shed some light on the knowledge uptake at Cern?
Yes, I am.
But before we're going to dive into your presentation, I would like to ask you a short question. Why knowledge valorization is important for Cern?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a good and it's also a very important question for Cern. Well, it is basically part of our mandate. It is in our founding convention that what we do at Cern should be, in a way or another, brought back to society at large. And that's what we do at Cern, and in particular with the activity of the Knowledge Transfer Group. We really try to understand how can we make sure that the knowledge that is developed at Cern and the innovation that is developed at Cern can create benefit for society, which goes beyond our main mandate, which is, of course, scientific research in high-energy physics. So it is really part of our mission to do that, and that's why it is so important.
All right, thank you. I think we're going to learn a little bit more now when you're going to deliver your presentation, how knowledge valorization is being uptaken in Cern. So without further ado, I would like to give you a floor.
Excellent, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank you and the organizers for this invitation. I think is something that is really important to us, that more people know what we do at Cern in terms of knowledge transfer, knowledge valorization, and how we do it. And I think what I'm going to do in my short presentation is also try to explain what is a little bit different of doing knowledge transfer and knowledge valorization at Cern compared to other places because of our specificity of being an international and intergovernmental organization. So I have prepared a few slides as a support of my presentation. I'd like to start with the Cern mission. I think everybody knows Cern for our primary, most important part of the mission, which is really the science. As you mentioned, Cern is a very large laboratory and is the largest laboratory on Earth in high-energy physics. And this is really what we do. But to do all the science we do, we need to develop technologies. And this is something which is sometimes less known. Every time we build a new accelerator, a new detector, we need to, very often we encounter technological problems which are new, and we need to solve them, of course, in collaboration with our member states and with industry in our member states. But this is the way we develop new technologies and innovation. Other important parts of the mission of Cern is training. Really, Cern is a training hub. We do that in many ways with all the schools, the contracts we have for students, and on-the-job training. We have a number of contracts which have limited duration, which allows people to come here, work some here with us, and then go back to their countries. And then collaboration. Cern, the motto of Cern when it was founded was Science for Peace, particularly important today, and is really a laboratory where people from all over the earth come here to collaborate with us for high energy physics, because beyond the member states, inside the experiments of CERN, we have collaboration with really every possible high energy physics institutes in the planet. But inside, in the frame of the mission of the organization, I like to explain what is the knowledge transfer mission at CERN. And the first point of our mission is really to maximize another form of return to society for what we do, which is a kind of technological and knowledge return. As I mentioned, what we do, the innovation we generate at CERN, technological innovation that we generate for our own research purposes, can be used in other fields. And this is what we want to make happen. And as all experts in technology transfer and knowledge valorization know, there is, you do need industrial partners to make these successful and to make these technologies available to society at large. And that's why we collaborate with a lot of industry, in particular in our member states and associate member states. The second point is promoting the image of CERN as a center of technology and innovation. CERN is a very strong brand, and our laboratory is known worldwide, but primarily for the science. And not many people realize that indeed CERN is an innovation hub and we develop so many interesting technologies. The third and last point is, which also goes back a little bit to the question you asked me to start before my presentation, we also want to demonstrate the importance and the impact of investment in fundamental research. And this is something which is very close to our heart. Of course, people understand better when we talk about applied research, but we need to make everybody understand that investing in fundamental research is very important because it also produces innovation which can be useful for society. So, well, you have understood the rules of the game. For us are really looking at all the technologies that we adopt at CERN, and together with our scientists and together with our partners outside CERN, we try to understand how we can make an impact in several areas which are far from high energy physics, if you want, as a first side, which are can we improve the planet, safety issues, Industry 4.0, new technologies, medical is very important for CERN, cultural heritage and aerospace. So that's just a list of some of the areas in which our technologies have found and we know will find applications. But how do we do that? We have created a knowledge transfer ecosystem at CERN, which is composed by many elements. And I will maybe not have time to go into details of each one of those, but I like to mention a few. So at the bottom, you see IP management. So in the group, and the KT group at CERN, we manage intellectual property organization. And this is something which, in a relatively standard way, we make agreements with our partners of various sorts, R&D collaboration, license. We also manage the patent portfolio organization, which is, compared to the size of the laboratory, a relatively small one, because patents for us are not necessarily an indicator of innovation. We patent only and exclusively when we think that this is the right channel to make our technologies available to society. Then other thing that I'd like to mention is open source, because this is a very important tool for the organization. And this is maybe the reason, one of the specificities of CERN is that being intergovernmental, we need to make sure that we give access to our technologies to everybody. And that's why we use so much open source tools, both for software, but also for hardware. And CERN has been even writing one of the most used open hardware licenses in the world. Other thing that I like to mention is entrepreneurship. We also like to work with startups, so not only with large established companies. We see entrepreneurship as a possibility for some of the scientists who come here with a limited duration contract. When they leave CERN, some of them might be interested in creating a startup based on what they worked on, but also we are open to work with startups from all our member states. And then something else that I wanted to mention is this collaboration and network. That's also very specific to CERN. We are, by nature, a laboratory which collaborates with a lot of different institutes, which of course also makes our life in KT more interesting. But also what is important for us is, as I mentioned, that we give equal opportunities to all our member states. And this is done, for example, with a special body we have, which is called the KT Forum, where we have a representative for all the member states which collaborate with us and understanding how to make our technologies available. So as I mentioned, I don't have time to go through all this, but as I will say at the end of my presentation, you can also consult our website, kt.cern, where you find a lot of information on our activity. So the framework, that's also important. We have prepared a number of policies. Actually, the first document we did in 2010 was an IP policy, which was actually, we took a lot of inspiration from the policy of the Commission of 2008. And then over the years, we made policies on how we disseminate our software. We have a paper specifically to medical application, because as I mentioned, it's one of the areas where we transfer a lot of technologies traditionally because of the specificities of our technologies. We made a spin-off policy. We have a patent policy. And then we also review our IP policy in 2020 to make this as a coherent set of policy. Why am I mentioning this? Because indeed, if I try to think at what is specific to Cern, we have tried to address all the specificities of doing KT and knowledge valorization in an intergovernmental organization in all those policies. And so if you look at them, you can find the guiding principles of our activities. And in the future, we are, for example, now working on a trademark policies, and there might be more to follow. A message that we always give to companies that might be listening is, how do you collaborate with Cern? I mentioned in startups, of course, we are very welcome if startups come to us and saying, we have a problem, maybe you have some technologies or some know-how which could help us solving our problem. But also we have service and consultancy agreements. We have specific infrastructure or testing environments that which can be used by others outside. We have R&D collaborations. I'm talking here about the collaboration that we have primarily with companies to take one of our technologies and adapt it to the use in another application, and then licensing agreements. I like to finish my presentation with 3 examples just to make it much more concrete. I take one from the medical field. So this picture shows a prototype, a product, a 3D color X-ray scanner, which is being used in the university hospital in Lausanne to start clinical trials. And several of these products are already dispatched in several hospitals around the globe. And this is a really good example of a technology we started from our detectors for the physics experiments, and with Mars Bioimaging, this startup, found its way to a product which is now being used in hospitals. And this collaboration, this integrated circuit that we use inside this product has been developed thanks to the Medipix collaboration. So you see also the way we do KT is very often using collaborative tools. We have a collaboration with Zenseact, which is a company of the Volvo Group, and we look together how we can use our machine learning algorithm that we use for analyzing the data of the LHC experiment. How can we apply those to help avoiding collisions in autonomous driving vehicles? And then other examples which I like to take from space. We tend to have a lot of collaboration with aerospace related institutes and companies, because the challenges we have at Cern are similar to the ones that you find in space. And as I mentioned, at Cern we also have test infrastructure which can be very useful. And in this specific case, you can see this picture that astronaut Thomas Pesquet activated Lumina, which is dosimetry, which was developed by CNES. But we have been testing this at Cern with one of our facilities that we use to test for radiation our equipment. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm super keen to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Arnelli. Thank you for this very comprehensive presentation. I think it really sheds some light on how knowledge valorization is being done at Cern. And I understand that, of course, it's a bit of a tough situation for you, to do it in less than 5 minutes. So that's why, I guess we're going to move to our short Q&A session, where I'm going to ask you a few questions. And my first question is that, that usually Cern is being associated with fundamental research. which is quite far away from the placement of the market. So my question to you is, how do you deal with this challenge? I mean, how do you end up getting so close to the market and even produce those innovations that you were just mentioning in your presentation?
Yes. So indeed, very good question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges that we have doing KT at Cern is that Cern, as I mentioned, is perceived primarily as a research laboratory. So many people believe that at Cern what we do is simply analyze the data of the experiments to find the Higgs boson or study it, etc., etc. But that, as I explained, is not the case. And how we tackle this challenge is really with communication. So we communicate as widely as possible about our activities and make sure that as many companies as possible understand that Cern is an innovation hub. We have a relevant technology which might be relevant for them. So this is done in multiple ways. We participate to industry fairs. Our scientists participate to a lot of conferences which also have industrial fairs, so it is another way to communicate. And then, of course, whenever we have successes of nice projects like the one I mentioned, we are in contact with the press, and we really try to have as much communication to the outside world as possible to make people understand that we develop technology which could be useful to them.
Thank you. So let's still stick to this practical approach of research. I'm aware that in Cern you have 10 BIGs, correct me if I'm wrong, so business incubation centers, and they are made to assist entrepreneurs and small businesses to taking Cern technologies and expertise to the market. So my question is, what are the most challenging parts in this whole process?
Yeah. So indeed, we have maybe something I can clarify. We have partnerships with a number of big 10 in our member states. And why is that? This is, you see, is another specificity of Cern as an intergovernmental organization. We don't have our own incubator here at Cern for two reasons. First, because the impact will be only locally, and we want, as I mentioned, to give equal opportunities to work with all our member states and associate member states, but also because I think it's not really would not be the best use of our resources to do an incubator which is managed by Cern. We have so many good incubators in our member states, so we partner with them. And indeed, as you mentioned, that the idea is to help existing startups with our technology. The most challenging part of this exercise is really to try to match what the startups we get in touch with need and what we have to offer. Because at the end, what we don't want to do at Cern is also to enter in competition with other research institutions or companies in our member states. So we need to enter in business with startups when they ask something which is pretty specific to what we do at Cern is not commonly available in the member states. So this process of listening to the needs of the startups and matching it with what we have to offer, which is specific to Cern, is, I would say, the most challenging part.
Thank you. Speaking about the challenges, so I have another question to you regarding the IP. You already mentioned in your presentation that Cern has developed quite exhaustive IP policy. So my question is, I mean, we are talking here about the intergovernmental organization. So in terms of IP, what kind of issues can arise in your organization? Maybe you can give some examples, and what are the mechanisms to solve those issues?
Yeah, very good. So indeed, I mean, this is, you mentioned issues. I mean, of course, this is something which makes our lives slightly complicated, but also I would say interesting. And this is a part I like it very much. So when maybe there is a clarification I need to make. I mean, we have at Cern about 4,000 people on our payroll. And those people which are employed by Cern, whatever they do, belongs to Cern. So that's the IP of Cern. But then at Cern, we have the collaborations which govern the physics experiments. If I take the ATLAS or CMS experiments of the LHC, those collaborations have hundreds of institutes which work on building and now operating the detector. So whatever, and this, you have Cern scientists together with scientists of other institutions working together. And whatever comes out of there in terms of IP is never belonging only to Cern. And so we need to manage that. And is honestly relatively simple because we talk to our colleagues in the technology transfer offices of those institutions, and then we make co-ownership agreement and we agree on how to manage the co-owned intellectual property. And so, as I said, is a complication, but I also think is very nice for Cern to show that even when you collaborate with multiple institutes, you can do knowledge valorization together, again, collaborating with them, and this is not an issue per se. It might be interesting for you to know that more than half of our patent portfolio is co-owned. I mean, the patents, more than half of our patents are co-owned with other institutions, which really is an indicator of how the Cern operates. Then another challenge related to IP management, strictly related to the way we operate, is licensing. So the IP that Cern scientists develop belongs to Cern, but of course, I mean, ultimately, this belongs to the member states who have paid the development of those. So we need to make sure that we have a mechanism to give this opportunity to use it to everybody. And this is the KT Forum that I mentioned. So the KT Forum we have asked, so that the highest governance body of the organization is a Cern Council, and we have asked the delegates of the various members and associate member states to nominate experts for KT. And this is what the KT Forum is, and we meet them regularly. We present them all the new technologies, and we give them presentation of what we are going to do on our priorities. And so they are all informed. They can bring us interesting companies to talk to from their countries, but also this allows us to inform them about the licenses, the technologies which are available for licensing. And this is also something which allows us to handle exclusive licensing, which is something that the organization does, but is pretty rare. But of course it happens. And I think it's still good that it happens because in some cases, that's the only way to make the technologies available to others. But of course, before giving an exclusive license, we have communicated the existence of this technology to all the member states so that anyone in the member states could have access to it.
Thank you, Mr. Nelly, for this explanation of your IP policy. So my last question to you, because I see we are running out of time a little bit. So my last question is a bit tricky, but I will ask you to reply to it in maybe 3 or 5 words, if you can do this. So what are the lessons learned from this international cooperation on knowledge transfer? And what could be your advice for those who would like to valorize the knowledge on international level? And I would like you to focus this advice on 3 main actors: on the business, on research, and on the public institutions.
Okay. I will be as short as possible. It will not be 5 words. I will use them. So the lesson learned from international cooperation on KT, I would mention 2 main things. One, I would say the power of open source licensing, which is something that I think we see very well at Cern, and I think maybe more institutions should be using these kind of tools. And then also that this international dimension brings new market. When we collaborate with a small startup from one of the member states, for them collaborating with us immediately opens a new door. And then the advice, so 3 advice that I could give. Well, for researchers in general, to remember that technology transfer and knowledge valorization is not a one-way mechanism. By cooperating with companies, and when our scientists cooperate with companies and transfer to them their technologies, their know-how, they will always end up learning something that they can reuse for their future developments. And so this is really something that I think we have seen at Cern many times, and that would be my advice for research, to keep that in mind. For businesses, is that and in having a relatively open approach to knowledge valorization and collaborating with other institutions and not being close to what is not invented in their company is something which can help their businesses. And then for public institution and public research, I would say be clear on what is important. Why do you do knowledge valorization? I like the word valorization, but for us at Cern, it's very clear that the value that we want to have, the monetary value, we want this to be in the member states and not with us, because the value for us is to be able to demonstrate that what we do as Cern is useful to others. So I think my message there would be make sure that you understand why you do knowledge valorization and focus on what is important to you.
Thank you, Mr. Anelli. Thank you for this conversation. That concludes our first part of Valorization talks for today. But
Many
please,
thanks to you.
Thank you. Please stay tuned because after this, you will have a second part of Valorization talks, which will be focusing on new European Bauhaus. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.